Welcome. Hello, one and all. First of all, I wanted to say it's an absolute honor to be here. So thank you to Louis and the whole team for bringing me out, and thank you, John, for the introduction. And also, thank you all for being here. I always like to say, I couldn't do it without you. And actually, so this is something that I've looked into over the last few years of speaking at conferences, and having reviewed the data, I can now confidently say that presenting is just vastly more enjoyable when you actually have an audience. So thank you truly from the bottom of my heart. I really do appreciate you being here, and rest assured that you are just already head and shoulders above an empty room. So thank you. Great, so as John said, I'm Elliot, pleasure to meet you. I'm a recovering mathematician, though I suppose you never really get cured, per se. I'm a former math professor turned mobile app developer, and I currently run I've bopped around the industry for close to a decade now, and I currently run a tech company in New York City. We do a bunch of things, IoT, artificial intelligence, augmented reality, mobile apps, perhaps obviously, I mean, so do I, I'm here. Yeah, but we do a lot of those things, but we also help companies reduce implicit bias in their hiring processes, at least for mobile app developers. It's something I'm very passionate about, and I don't get enough requests for it. So if any of that interests you, please, by all means, come talk to me, but especially that last one. But we're not going to talk about any of that today. Today we're going to talk about functional programming. That's right. This is a Trojan horse talk in order to preach about functional programming. Not really. I've just found that functional programming and the strengths that it has, in particular, are well suited to the problem of UI styling code. I hope at the end of this talk to have convinced you of that as well. Okay? At the end of this talk, I'm hoping that you will be able to just go out and write better UI styling code. Right? No big refactors, no huge libraries to incorporate, changing all your code. Just from now on, you will be able to incrementally write better UI code. That's the goal. So usually, the most obvious next thing for me to do in a talk like this is to talk about the differences between object-oriented programming and functional programming. Today, though, I'm not going to do that for two reasons. First, because it's my talk and I don't wanna. And second, because I'd much rather show you than tell you, okay? So instead, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna give you a one-sentence explanation of the difference between object-oriented programming and functional programming. Are there any objections? No? Good? Great, because I don't have a plan otherwise. So here it is, the one-sentence explanation. In object-oriented programming, you focus on objects. In functional programming, you focus on functions. Okay? That's it. That's all. Thank you. So as it turns out, there's a lot of subtlety involved in that. I'm not going to get into that. I want to show you, not tell you. But a lot of people, they hear functional programming and they think, oh no, monoids, semi-rings, functors, higher order functions. And I promise you, today we're not going to touch more than one of those, and it's just going to be very brief. I promise. It's going to be so small. We're going to understand it. I'm going to walk you through it, and it's going to give us so much power, okay? So I hope to convince you that it's going to be okay, okay? So just trust me. The core concept here is, again, you have, in object-oriented programming, your core unit is the class. In functional programming, it's a function, okay? That's all. So today, when we start going through things, we're just going to be leaning a little more towards functions. That's all we're doing. Okay, it's not a huge thing. It's not going to be scary. It's just a little tiny thing. Okay, so just for your records, there it is. That's the sentence. So remember it. So just before we get into this, I do want to make a quick content note. So I went back and forth on this a lot. I actually changed the title, the description of my talk, and I was going to change it a bunch more times. It says in the talk that I'm going to be focusing on SwiftUI. After much deliberation, I've decided that I'd rather introduce this sort of style of doing things in a more familiar way. So I'm going to be talking mostly about UIKit, and we'll get to SwiftUI at the end. Okay, so I will cover SwiftUI if I have time, but most of it is going to be about UIKit, and we'll see at the end how we can apply the same things to SwiftUI. Okay? I just don't want to get the new stuff with SwiftUI confused with the new stuff for functional programming. Okay? So with that said, let's get, oh, yes, great. Okay. So before we get into code per se, I want you to imagine a scenario with me. Okay? And I know programmers, known for their imagination. Okay? But imagine your designer walks up to your desk, and they have a style sheet, and they hand you the style sheet, and they say, here's the style sheet. And on this style sheet, it has a few things, lots of things, in fact. But some of those things involve 3 buttons, which you can see over on the right here. It is the right for you guys, yes? I'm going to get confused about this too. Great. So 3 buttons, maybe lots of other things for the designer has for us, but today we're just going to be worrying about those 3 buttons. Okay? So let's talk about these sort of conceptually, right? So the solitary button, we're thinking here like main action that we're doing, right? So it's going to be at the bottom of the screen. It's going to advance you to the next screen. It's going to be like the main thing that you're going to do. But then sometimes you're going to offer your user a choice, and you have these 2 buttons that come together. Okay? One of them is going to be sort of like a negative action, like a cancel button, and the other one's going to be sort of like an affirmative thing that you're doing, like this other button that we're calling the paired button in this case. Okay? So we're going to have those together, and they're going to have sort of similar designs, but they all kind of want to have a unifying design underneath. So as you can see, I have written us a view controller here. And this view controller just sort of does this. It doesn't worry about any sort of way of doing this. It just literally like, oh, here's, I want to make this happen on the screen, so I'm just going to do it. Repeating myself all over the place, that's what happens. So let's go through this and look at what this does. Okay, so sort of normal stuff. We're creating the view. We're setting the background color. We're going to use auto layout for this. We create these 3 buttons named intuitively. We set their titles, again, intuitively. And then down here, this is where we're going to live today. So this is our styling code. This is how we make these styles occur. Okay? There is more to this, right? But it's mostly just constraints and making sure that things appear in the middle of the screen and all that. Okay? So let's take a look. So first, before we look at the code for this styling, let's talk about what the actual, descriptively what it is. Okay, so we have that solitary button. Let's describe what it looks like. Well, it's got a light gray background, bold, blue font, rounded corners. Okay? Cancel button has a border all the way around, bold, blue font, clear background, and rounded corners. Okay? Finally, last but not least, we have the pair button. It's got a bold, blue font, border all the way around, light gray background, rounded corners. Okay? So if we look at the code here, we start seeing some similarities, right? So okay, all 3 of them have these corner radiuses, right? They're all the same. We're all going to use auto layout for this, right? And we're doing that bold blue font in 3 places, right? So now as we start looking at this, we're like, okay, well, there's some code that we might be able to reuse, right? So today what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you sort of the object-oriented way of doing this, and then I'm going to show you the functional way of doing this, okay? So, and I've written, so the code that I'm about to show you, I have code bases on my hard disk that have this style of programming. So this is it's a reasonable thing, it's sort of normal. It's been around for a long time, so we're going to go through it and we're going to talk about it a little bit. Okay? So I see these repeated things, right? And it's only after we get through those repeated things that we start to get to some of these other things, like the borders and the light gray background and all that. So great. Let's start with the biggest stuff first. They all have certain things that they share between them. So lucky us, I have written us a superclass button here called the diamond button down here, that we can use to sort of abstract all that information out, okay? So we have these we've just encapsulated all these things. So we have the inits that we want, and they're all calling this configure function. And this configure function just sets up auto layout. It does the bold, blue font, rounded corners. Okay? So we can go up here, and we can replace these three with a diamond button. And then we can go through here and comment these out. Now, the name of the game today is I'm going to make a change, and please say a prayer to the demo gods for me. Again, I made some changes to this recently, so I need your prayers as we go through this live demo, okay? So the name of the game today will be I'm going to make a change, and then hopefully it looks exactly the same when we're done, okay? So that's the goal here. Right? So I've just commented out this code. They are all now diamond buttons. So if I run this, ta-da! Hooray! Okay, so everything's safe. We're still okay. We still have these buttons appearing the way they should. Great, so we're on a roll. Fantastic. We did those. So what's the next largest sort of code hog? Well, this border, right? So okay, we're going to go down here, and we say we got this diamond button. We want to do the same thing as the diamond button, but this time we want to add a border. Okay, so that's fine. So we do this open class, and we're going to call it border button. And it's going to inherit from diamond button, right? Remember, we want to do the same things. Okay? And we're just going to override the configure function, right? That's easier. That's nicer than before, right? We don't have to do those inits or any of that. So we make sure that we call the configure, the superclass configure. And then we're just going to take these ones right here and put them here. Okay. Oops. Okay. So now we have this border button. Fantastic. Let's go back up and replace these guys with it. Okay? So we're going to take these two and replace them with border buttons. Okay? So now we can get rid of this code here and this code here. Okay? Again, I'm going to run it, pray to the gods, and hopefully we will get the same thing. Ta-da! A magic trick. Great. Wow, we are just really flying through this. Okay, so we got these the borders. Now we want to do this background color. Okay, so we're going to create a new class, right? Because we're doing object-oriented, right? So open class. Let's call it a BG button. Okay. And it's going to inherit from diamond button. Okay. Again, we're going to override configure, call superclass, and just add this little bit to it. Okay. Here. And now we can get rid of this. And we can say, OK, here we go. This is now a background button, BG button. Right? And now we run it. Ta-da! Still working. Hooray! Fantastic. Man, object-oriented programming is so cool. All right, what could go wrong? So let's see. So now we got this last one. We've just got this last thing here. So we've commented all this code out. We're reusing everything. So now let's just get rid of this last line of extra code. Why don't we just do that? Okay, so we're doing the same thing as before. So we're going to do this open class. And let's call it paired button. Right? And now we run into a bit of a problem. Right? So what do we subclass? Well, we could subclass the border button. And if we do that, then as before, we're going to do this configure super configure. Right? But now we're going to have to just copy this code into this spot. And now we have repeated code. I don't know about you, but when I see something like this, it just kind of like crawls in through my ear and sits in the back of my head and just itches. Just itches. I can't stand it, right? I've got these are the same class, right? This is the same method in 2 different classes. Oh, that drives me crazy. OK, fine. Why don't we do this? OK, so first of all, here, so the reason why this is happening is ultimately because Swift is single inheritance. OK, you can't inherit from 2 different classes. What we want for this paired button is it should be both bordered and have background color, right? So we have this border button and we have this BG button, but I can't inherit from both of them. So I have to choose one way or another. So this is referred to as the diamond inheritance problem. And it is because it forms a diamond here, right? So we have the diamond button at the top, and then we have the bordered button, and we have the BG button, and the paired button wants to inherit from both. Okay? So that's the problem that we're facing today. Okay? So to solve this, what we're going to do is we're going to use another. We can do this, right? Object-oriented for the win. So what we're going to do is we're going to create an extension, okay? Which I would argue is already a step towards functional programming. Remember, functional programming is about leaning towards functions. And by creating an extension, we're just adding functions to an existing class. So we're already heading in that direction. I just wanted to take a note there, even in this way of doing things, right? So what we're going to do, OK, so what we're going to do is we're going to create this extension on UI button. And it's going to have this method called setup auto layout, right? And it's not going to take any parameters. It's not going to return anything. It's just going to be, it's a function on UI button. And all it's going to do is this part right here. Okay? So I take this, and I put it in here. And now I've got that. Okay? So we do this a few more times with all these other things, and we get an extension that looks a lot like this. So I'm just going to take this out and drop it up here just to save us some time. Okay? So all I've done here is I've created this extension. It sets up auto layout. It sets up the title. It sets up the corners, the light gray background here, and the border. Okay? So now at least, right, so the problem before, right, so we have this repeated code. And you can imagine that if this was not a one-liner, but instead was 500 lines, we wouldn't copy and paste that, right? We would instead get it out into its own function, like in this extension, and just call it from here, right? So we would do something like this. So set up light gray background, okay? And same thing here. Right, so now we're sort of guaranteed, like, OK, even if we are repeating code, it's not going to be 500 lines. It's just one function that we're repeatedly calling. Right? And we can do that again up here. So we say set up border. And up here, we can do the same thing, right? So set up auto layout, like we did. Set up corners, like we did. And set up that bold blue font. So made a lot of changes just now, right? And I need to remind myself, I need to go up here and do paired button. Right? So a lot of changes. Let's see if it works. Hooray. OK. So we did it. All right. Whew. We were able to make it work with object-oriented programming. Now, this is, again, still a bit of a pain. Right? Oh, and sorry, let me just to prove it, I will do this again because I didn't run it without that last thing. Okay? Great. OK, so still working. So that's fine, right? We did it. But so now at this point, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take some of this code, because this is a good time to start thinking about, all right, so this extension is kind of functional-ish already. So I'm going to take these functions out, and I'm going to put them up here. And this is just because playgrounds, sometimes you have to define things before you use them. So I'm putting them up here, again, also just to sort of like get them out of the way. So I'm going to put them up here, and I'm going to make them accept an argument, okay? Because they're no longer extension functions. They're free functions, right? We don't know what's going on with them. So we're going to make them take in an object, and that type of that object is going to be UI button. And then in all these spots, we're just going to set the property on it, And I clicked in the wrong place, so I'm just going to have to fix that in a second. Okay? So it does the same thing, right? Now, if I leave this uncommented, it's going to start messing with because they have the same names as the extension below. So I'm just going to comment them out for now, but I want you to start to have these in the back of your head. Okay? They're just free functions doing the same thing as before. They just accept an argument instead of being in an extension. Okay? Cool. So now I want to throw a curveball. Okay? So your designer comes back to you, and they say, hey, you remember all those other things that are definitely on the style sheet that I didn't show you? Well, I want you to now do the design for that. Okay? Right? Okay. Well, geez, that looks similar. Right? So now we have this block of text over here that has a blue border, rounded corners. Okay? So let's look and see, okay, well, object-oriented, that's what we're doing right now. So we're going to go down, and we're going to say, okay, well, how do we do that? Oh, but wait, our extension is only for UI buttons. And I mean, okay, mea culpa, right? Auto layout, you can do that with UI views, not just UI buttons. So that was my fault for putting it in that extension and not thinking of the UI view case. So, all right, fine. You know, I'm gonna fix it, and I'm gonna put this extension in here, and it's gonna be an extension on UI view. And then in this other extension that I've created, where it could be, you know, 10, 20 functions long, I'm going to find all of the places where it is potentially something that applies to UI view as well as UI button, and I'll take those out, and I'll put them in here. So, you know, again, that was my fault for doing it in the first place. Wrong, right? Okay, so now I've got this. Now I want to reuse these styles for this block of text. Okay, so I'm going to create this UI view, and we're going to call it, it's an open class, and we'll call it border view, shall we? And it will inherit from UI view. And because it's doing, you know, we're overriding UI view, we gotta do these things before. Right, as before. So this diamond button is coming in handy, right? So, all right, we're gonna override the inits. You're gonna have this configure function, and we're just gonna take this setup border. Well, so setup auto layout, setup border, and setup corners. Okay. So now let's see if this works, right? So we're going to go up here, and here's our wrapper view that does this border and corner stuff. We get rid of it, and we say instead you are a border view. Okay. So hopefully this will work. Hooray! Okay, I mean, hooray or hooray, right? So we've saved ourselves this code, and you know, this code, I guess that's pretty good, and we've done it in only this many lines of code. Hooray, right? So, you know, but I mean, like, this is still a win, right? Because we could have hundreds of screens, right? So we're still gaining something by doing this. So this is not altogether a bad approach, okay? So now we've got this. I've shown you how this works. Now I'm going to show you the functional way of doing this, okay? So I'm going to go, so first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to comment out all this code, because again, the functions being, you know, similarly named is going to confuse the compiler. I'm going to turn this back into a UI view. If I run this right now, it will complain, so I'm not going to, because I still have commented out all the styling code, so it's just gonna blow up. Okay? So I'm just gonna use these UI buttons. Everything is now sort of its base state. It hasn't had any styling whatsoever. I'm gonna go up here, and I'm gonna take these functions here, and I'm gonna pretend like the designer hasn't thrown me the curveball yet. Okay, so I'm gonna proceed as though I hadn't thought of this UI button, UI view problem. Okay? So as a functional sort of person, I am going to create a function. It's actually a higher order function, right? And I know, scary. Don't freak out. Okay, a higher order function is just a function of functions. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to create a function that's going to take in a bunch of other functions and apply them all. Okay, so I'm going to call this function union. Okay, and you'll see why in a moment. Okay. So I create this function, and I name it union, and it's going to be a variadic function on a set of functions. Okay, I know it's a mouthful, but you'll see what I mean in a minute. So I have this, so it's unnamed functions, and it is going to be, there are functions from t to void. And also, I want to make this generic. So we have this t. And we want a bunch of them. So it's a variadic function. Okay? And it's going to return a function from t to void. Okay? All right? So so far, this is all I'm doing, right? I've created this function. And what I want to do is I want to take a bunch of functions from t to void and return one function from t to void. That's my goal here. So now we have to write this function, and it turns out it's not too bad. So we're returning a new function. So we're just going to loop through all of the functions f in the functions that were given to us. And this function is going to be a function of t, right? Remember that generic that we did? And we're just going to apply f to t. Okay? That's all. Right? We give it a list of functions. This function just loops through it and applies all of those functions to t. That's all. Okay? So now I've done this. Right? What does this get me? Well, what I can do now is I can create new functions out of the other functions that I've created. So let's say I want to create a function, style, and it's going to be called base button, let's say. Okay? And this base button function is going to be the union of setup, auto layout, okay? Setup, corners, and setup title. Okay? Because that's what we were doing before, right? The thing that they all have are rounded corners, bold, blue font, and they use auto layout. Okay? So great, all right, so I got that style. Now what am I going to do with it? Well, I'm going to create a style, and we're going to call it the solitary button. Solitary button. And it's going to be the union of style base button and setup light gray background. Because that's the difference with the solitary button. Okay? That's great. Okay, let's see what else we can do. So we do let style BG button, right? And that's going to be the union. Oh, so I already did that. That's the solitary button. Okay. So now we're going to do the bordered button. And this is the union of the style base button and setup border. Okay. Finally, I'm going to do let style paired button. And remember, so this is where we had trouble before, right? This was the problem. Right? So style paired button equals union style base button and setup border and setup light gray background. Right? So now I've created them. Now I want to use them. This is we're almost to the part where we get to celebrate. So style solitary button. And we just pass it this solitary button. Okay. And here, this cancel button, we say style bordered button. Cancel button. finally, we have this paired button, style paired button. Oops. Okay. So if all works out the way I want it to, right, I'm going to go ahead and uncomment this just because, again, we're ignoring that for now. So we're assuming that the designer hasn't given us this curveball. So now, hopefully, if I run this, and I've done everything right so far, it works. As Daniel would say, thank you. Right, so this is the magic trick, right? So we have created multiple inheritance with functions, okay, in Swift. Right, that's kind of a magical thing. Well, I mean, to me, it's kind of cool, right? So okay, so maybe you're not convinced, okay? So I've just done this. I've set up these functions, right, here, and sure, it fits in one screen's worth, right, compared to this down here. But down here, we had this other border view. So now, let's say the designer comes to us and says, okay, well, do this now. See how you handle it, right? Well, okay, so we can do that, right? So now we say, oh, right, these functions don't have to be UI buttons, right? So now I can just go through here, 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 and here, and I do UI view. No copy and pasting, no new extensions, just changing the parameters. Okay, so I've done that. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new style, let style base view this time, and it's going to be the union of pretty much all of this, except we're not going to do the title. All right, and now we can just get rid of this and say style base view. So now we have this base view, right? And now we can create a new style called let style, let's say, bordered view. And this is the union of style base view and setup border. Oops. So I didn't actually apply it. Hold on. Right, so here it is. Here's our code that does the same thing, right? And we're just going to say style bordered view wrapper view. Okay. Ta-da! I really feel like I should pull a rabbit out of a hat at this point. Okay. So, right? So this is kind of nice, right? So instead of doing a whole new extension, a whole new class, and then having to replace all of the UI views everywhere, I just add 2 lines of code, refactor 1 line of code, and then apply it. Okay? And now, again, right, we're still in this same, see, there's an extra return up here, and we're still in the same screen, right? So this is the magic here, all right? This is the core of it, right? So the fundamental reason why this happens, right? The reason why functions are so much more flexible, because they were kind of made that way, right? So classes fundamentally encapsulate. They enclose, they restrict, right? Whereas functions expand. They make bigger, greater, right? So finding the balance between those two is sort of the fundamental difficulty of architecture, okay? But we can apply that, especially to UI styling, and get this stuff. Now, the great thing about this, so first of all, I highly recommend having a playground where you have a style sheet, essentially, right? It's just really nice when you have a team member come on and they want to see, okay, well, how do I make that button look that way? If you have a playground that has it, then you can just say, oh, well, okay, there's that solitary button. Let me see what style it uses for it. The other thing is, this is very reusable, this is very discoverable because I can just start typing style and I get a list of styles, right? So that's kind of nice. That's kind of a nice way of doing it, right? So naming these things, naming these things with the prefix style makes it more discoverable. As we can see, these functions make it very flexible. When we have some sort of change, we can change it very easily. And obviously, because we have this union higher order function, it's very reusable, right? We're just referencing other things, right? So yeah, so that's what we have for the UIKit. That's the magic to UIKit styling. Now I want to talk a little bit about SwiftUI, because you can do the same things with SwiftUI. It's just a little bit different. Okay, so I want to prep you mentally for this. Okay? So whereas before we had this union function, right? What it did is it took a bunch of functions from something to nothing, okay, and it just applied them over and over again. In SwiftUI, it's much more about transformations, right? So you're passing information through. It's a pipeline of code, right? So rather than just applying things over and over again, right, what we're going to do is we're going to take something, apply a change to it, and pass it on to the next link in the pipeline, right? That's the sort of the main thing that I've learned with working with SwiftUI in a functional format, okay? So to do this, I have to provide some sort of function that will allow me to do this in SwiftUI, okay? And this is kind of a problem. So SwiftUI is young, it is new, and there are a lot of things that are not terribly well documented. And I discovered this as I was working through this, and again, this is why I sort of went back and forth a lot. So in SwiftUI, because of that, okay, well, so I'll show you, okay? So here we are, right? Because of this sum keyword, right? Okay, so let me intro you to this screen. It's the same screen. Great. So the only difference now is that we're using SwiftUI. So with this sum keyword, okay, this is something that I'm not sure whether they plan to support or they just haven't yet. I haven't been able to find any documentation that says one or the other. You can create functions that return some view. You can create properties that are of type some view. But you cannot create functions which return functions that return some view. Which kind of throws a wrench in my whole, functional programming thing. So, but we can still we can still pass things through, right? Because we can still create those functions, right? So instead of the union function, instead I've created these operators, okay? And I know, kind of scary, right? But all they're doing is, so let's take this operator here. It's these 3 arrows, and I use it to create my styles in here, right? So 3 arrows. And we take a function f that goes from t to u, right? Not from me to u, from t to u. And a function g from u to v, okay? And we return a function from t to v. It's just applying one after the other, right? So I evaluate f of the thing, and then I pass that in to g. And then I return g of the thing. That's all, right? It's a lot of, it looks scary, right? We got these infix operator, we got precedence groups, associativity, all kinds of scary things, but really all this is doing is just saying, okay, I want to apply one function after the other and pass it into the next. Okay, that's all. This one is just because I was having a little trouble with the compiler in the playground, so I made something new. It's 4 arrows. It does the same thing, but with a function with 2 inputs. There's a special functional name for this, but you don't need to know it. Again, it's just we're saying we're taking this function from t to u and returning a v, and we're passing it in to a v to w. That's right. That's all. Okay. So in this way, we can create the same styles that we did before. Right? These same reusable styles. We have this let solitary button, right, that we use right here. Right? We have this style text block that lives up here. Right? Style cancel button, which is right here. Right? We can see all these in one place, and they're very, very short. If we want to add more things to it, it's pretty easy. If we want to take things away, that's pretty easy. Okay? So you'll notice, though, that there's a bit more hardware involved, right? And again, this is sort of like a SwiftUI. It's young, it's new, okay? So we have some wrapping functions that just take a view and wrap it in either a group or an H stack or a V stack or whatever. I made this one for a spacer, right? Just so that I can add spaces in between things. I've created this function toText that takes a string and turns it into a text, right? I did this standard padding. I got this do a border thing, right? And then I just take these sort of building blocks and I combine them, right? So the text block, right, that bordered view is really just a text, right? It takes in a string and it creates a text, and then you give it standard padding, then you wrap it in a group, then you give it a border. You give that border a group, or that group a border. Similarly, you have a button label, right? You're taking a text, and you are applying some padding, wrapping it in a spacer, and then wrapping in that in a horizontal, an H stack, right? And then I can just take these things, similarly, so I can just put these things together. This new button takes in a string and just applies this style button label, right? Because remember, in SwiftUI, you create a button and you can put a view inside that button, right? So all I'm doing is creating a button label of the style that I want and putting it in there and accepting an action, right? So I take a string and an action, and I put them together, and I create a button of the style that I want. And so then all I have to do is do the styling for these buttons. So I take this new button, and I set up the BG for the solitary, I set up the border, I set up the border and the BG, right? And so now I can just pass in to this function the name, the title of the button, and whatever action I want it to take. I didn't fill that in because it's not necessary at this point. But that's all I have to do, right? And I can take this big, long bit of text and just style it into this text block with a border, okay? So these same concepts, right? We could do all of these things with structs, right? Structs that do some view, right? We could do that. But because we see we could have the same problem with the multiple inheritance, instead we use these functions. And we build these pipelines, right? Because this creates a new button, and it passes into the next thing, which sets up the border, which sets up the background, all of those things creating a pipeline until on the other end, we get the styled view that we want, okay? So it's the same idea, just a different sort of paradigm. That's all, right? So hopefully, we're now approaching the end of the talk, so hopefully I've convinced you that there is some use to this style of programming, okay? And this is something that you can use and go out into your lives and just incrementally write better code. And when SwiftUI comes along, you are well prepared to do the same thing in SwiftUI, right? It's going to change, there are going to be new things, but the concepts, relying on functions, leaning towards functions rather than classes, that's going to do you some good, okay? Now, before I go, I do want to give some references, okay? I'm not the first person to have thought of these things, right? Point Free is a great website started by some of the founding members of the Kickstarter mobile team. And they're doing some absolutely great work about functional programming. If you want to learn more about functional programming, go there. It's really fantastic stuff. And yeah, they're great. They also give great talks, and they have a lot of other talks sort of around on the internet. Point Free sort of they have free talks and paid talks that are behind a paywall, but they're all great. This one is a free one, so take a look. It's the same thing. They go into a little more detail of like the different options other than object-oriented programming that you can do to do these sorts of styles, and why those are also not as good as functions. Okay, so I didn't get into any of those things. Go to them for more details. Okay. And second, there's a great talk by Jason Zarita, who did a talk about sort of some of the styling things and reusing them and sort of broadens it and talks about how to take the, to make it more discoverable. So a lot of the styling stuff so that it's very easy to find, that's his stuff. Like, it's really cool stuff. He's a great speaker. And this Functional Swift conference was organized by Brandon and Steven. So again, great guys. So with that, I just wanted to say thank you. Thank you very much.